as I share my screen. Wonderful. We got to move this bar. There we go. Okay. Oh, I should also let you all know that because I'm using a PowerPoint, there will be subtitles throughout today's program. So be sure to, if you do have any questions, hopefully the closed caption will work out well for everybody. And I do ask that you stay muted throughout the program and use the chat function if you do have any questions. So to start us off, the State of Anti-Semitism in America 2020 is based off of two surveys that American Jewish Committee did, one of American Jews and one of the general U.S. population. All right. Next slide. So one of the things that we saw that was really scary from the survey is that actually 9 in 10 American Jews believe that anti-Semitism is a problem in the United States today, right? 37 view it very seriously and 51% as somewhat of a problem. That 82% of American Jews believe that anti-Semitism has increased over the past 5 years, right? 43% believe that it has increased a lot and 39% believe that it has increased somewhat. Now, a little bit about American Jewish Committee before we really take a deep dive into the data. So AJC was founded in 1906 by a group of American Jewish business leaders who felt they had a responsibility to speak out for the Jewish communities in what is today Moldova by the Tsarist Russian regime. Fast forward nearly 115 years. AJC CEO is named David Harris. He's been our CEO for over 30 years. We have 24 offices in the United States, and I'm glad to share that we have my colleague who's the director of our Minneapolis office and also the assistant director of regional offices, Jacob Milner, is joining us today as well. We have 13 overseas posts. In case you didn't know, we were actually the first American Jewish organization to open an office in Jerusalem. We were also the first American Jewish organization to open an office in Berlin after the fall of the wall. And most exciting to us is we have announced that we will be opening an office in Dubai in the coming months, in part in response to the Abraham Accords, the historic Abraham Accords. We have 37 global partnerships, which means that we help to advocate on behalf of Jewish communities around the world. And in the Southeast, we've been here for over 75 years. Now, American Jewish Committee has 3 main advocacy priorities. We combat anti-Semitism, we advocate for Israel's security and legitimacy, and we fight extremism, promote democratic values, and protect human dignity at home and abroad. And all of these things are really foci for us in the United States and around the world because of the way that our organization is constructed by having all of these offices and posts. We do this by focusing on sort of 2 key areas of work, right? One is on intergroup relations, our work with ethnic and religious communities. The Black Jewish relations is an area that is very important to us. It's one of the reasons that I have a secondary position as the national director for Black Jewish relations, but we also have a Muslim Jewish, we've got Latino Jewish, we've got Asian Jewish. We do a lot of work in the interfaith arena. And then in the governmental affairs world, we focus in 2 key areas. One is diplomatic. So many of you have met before the Consul General of Israel to the Southeast. So AJC, but there are also consuls general for Germany and France and Belgium and Mexico and Argentina and Brazil and Japan and Korea. And they all cover various regions throughout the Southeast. So AJC works with all of those consulates in the Southeast and across the country to advocate for the priorities that we shared. And then on the political side, we do a lot of work on educating elected officials about anti-Semitism, about the strength of the U.S.-Israel relationship, and about promoting democratic values and human rights. And I will share, so that everybody understands, over the course of our Senate runoff, I can share that AJC was one of the few, well, it was the only Jewish organization, I believe, and probably one of the few organizations in general who met with all 4 Senate candidates, which is something that we are very, very proud of. Additionally, AJC has an initiative called Project Interchange, which sends leaders to Israel. And over the past few years, we have sent a number of people from North Carolina, including the chancellors of NC State and the chancellor at Wake Forest. And we had even sent the chancellor of UNC Chapel Hill to Israel a number of years ago. Not the current one, but the one before last, who's Holden Thorpe. When Holden Thorpe was chancellor, we sent Holden Thorpe traveled with us to Israel as well. So getting into the data. So the reason that we're here today is to talk about AJC's report. And as I mentioned in the opening, there were 2 different surveys that were undertaken. One was of the US adult average, was about 1,000. You should all know that the average size of a poll is around 500, 550. So we went above and beyond to gain a sample size of over 1,000 because we did not want anyone to question the validity of our data. The timings for the surveys is listed here. They were all conducted via telephone. And this is very important. The eligibility criteria, you had to be 18 years or older in order to be eligible to participate in the survey. And that's important to know as we sort of walk through the data. So what does the data say? So sadly, more than 1 in 3 American Jews have been targets of anti-Semitism, both online and offline over the past 5 years. Think about that. 1/3 of the American Jewish population that was surveyed has had an experience. And that, I actually thought that would decrease perhaps because of COVID over this past year. But really, that's one of the areas where we've seen online anti-Semitism sadly increase. And 1 in 4 American Jews have avoided publicly wearing, carrying, or displaying things that might help people identify them as Jews over the past 2 years. So this point in particular is something that really resonated with me. When I saw this data, and in our 2019 data, it was very similar. I started wearing a kippah out in public because I wanted to be a representative. I wanted to be able to show to the Jewish community that I was not afraid to be represented and identified as Jewish in public. And so, and these numbers are even higher if you ask people between the ages of 18 and 29. I believe last year it was 41% of those between the ages of 18 to 29 avoided wearing or having anything that identified them publicly as being Jewish. And think of it, tonight we're all here together. Thankfully, we can be on Zoom in the comfort of our home. But in previous years, this would have been done in person, right? So you would have all come to a central Jewish location, and people would have been afraid to have attended just because of the location of the event, right? And that's what you see here. Do you ever have concern, avoid certain places or events? And so in 2020, it was 31%. In 2019, it was 25%. But even still, 1/4 to 1/3 of us were nervous or would have avoided going because of anti-Semitism. Like, that's bad. That's bad. It's bad. It's very bad. So this is one of the slides that I think is very important to understand the demographic of the data for who was polled. So on which social media platforms have American Jews been targeted by anti-Semitism? Now, the questions, the respondents were asked these, sort of like check the box, right? So Facebook, 62% of those targeted say that they've experienced anti-Semitism, 33% on Twitter. And as you go Instagram, YouTube, Snapchat, TikTok, the fact is, because we interviewed people over the ages of 18, we don't understand quite how these numbers are impacting a younger generation. But I'd like to share with you an anecdote from this past October. So AJC Atlanta, my office, had an intern. Actually, we have a program called WHIP, Leaders for Tomorrow. It's a high school program which teach high school sophomores and juniors about Jewish and Israel advocacy. It's really a training, not a fact-based lesson. It's a year-long program. So one of the alum of our program is now a freshman at Northwestern University in Chicago. And as a result of the summer, the social justice protests in the summertime, there were many groups who sought to abolish the police. So there became a group at Northwestern to abolish the police. Now, the president or chancellor of Northwestern also happens to be Jewish. And as part of the abolitionist movement at Northwestern, They said that they were against anti-Semitism, they were against racism, and they were against Zionism. Right? Think about that. Now, what does Zionism have to do with anything related to abolition? The abolitionists, I have absolutely no idea. But it's something that we were clearly paying attention to. So this young student who went through our program and felt, I want to reach out and connect and understand why. So she messaged them on Instagram because that's where all the group was posting all of their information. And she said, I'd love to talk to you about, your positions. And they said, look, we already have Jews that support us. We're not going to talk to you. And then they took her private message and they shared it publicly. And then this young girl, 18 years old, started getting harassed on Instagram because she wanted to understand why they were anti-Zionists as a part of the abolitionist group. And not only that, but her roommate, who also happens to be Jewish, was also starting to get challenged. And so it was, what they were doing was they were calling them Nazi pigs. They were, questioning their Judaism. I mean, it was really a terrible experience that they had. And because Northwestern was 100% virtual, they weren't experiencing any anti-Semitism in person. It was 100% online. So that's not reflected in our survey because she, at the time of the survey, would have been too young to have responded. But it's important for us to understand and recognize, just as the hate takes place across all of these platforms, it also has a direct impact on the individuals themselves. Now, one of the things that I should share is that over the summertime, and you all might have seen it, that Facebook announced that they were going to remove Holocaust denial from their platform. And one of the reasons that they did it was in part because of AJC's advocacy. Excuse me while my daughters come and say good night. Good night. Okay. Let us out. All right. Watch out. Okay. Come on. I'm talking, so you gotta. All right. Okay. Sorry about that. It's bedtime. So what also is a concern for us is that people need to continue reporting these things. So it's not good enough that you're experiencing it, but rather that it's important that we continue to share it with the platforms and with law enforcement when we have experienced anti-Semitism in these areas. Now, to what extent, now part of the survey wasn't just about how do people feel about anti-Semitism, although that is one of the things that made it unique. And just also I should add, the Jewish community has done surveys on the number of anti-Semitic experiences, on the types of anti-Semitic experiences, but nobody until these two surveys had actually ever asked anyone what they felt about anti-Semitism. How do they feel it was impacting them? So one of the things we asked about was the types of anti-Semitism. From where do you see anti-Semitism? So 89% of those who were surveyed felt, fear it from the extreme political right. 85% are from the extremism in the name of Islam, and 61% are from the extreme political left. Now, remember, the question here is, to what extent do you view the three main sources as anti-Semitic threats, right? But that's how people viewed it. Now, in November of 2020, the FBI came out with their annual hate crimes report for the previous year, for 2019. In that survey of hate crimes in the United States, 60.2% of all religious bias crimes in America targeted Jews. Let that sink in for 1 second. Less than 2% of the US population, I believe that we're about 1.8%, of less than 2% of the US population, we experience more than nearly 2/3 of all religious-based hate crimes. Now, when you look at the numbers, right, now again, right, the numbers are from 2019 and the year before that, 2018. But in 2018 was when the Pittsburgh massacre took place. 2019 was when Poway took place. So, but you can see all of the numbers have increased, whether it was victims of hate crimes, whether it was incidences or different offenses. Now, one of the big challenges that we have is how do we define anti-Semitism? So when asking the general population, 53% of those surveyed said that they had heard of and know what it means, right? But that means that 46% of the general US population doesn't know what anti-Semitism is, or if they've heard of it, they're not really sure. Well, that's a problem, right? That means that either we're not explaining well enough or we're not talking about it enough. And I know from my Facebook feed we are definitely talking about it. But the question is our message being amplified beyond our immediate circles, right? How is the broader community understanding? How are our political leaders understanding what anti-Semitism is? Which in part is one of the reasons why advocacy on the topic of anti-Semitism is so important. I've had countless meetings with elected officials where they say, yes, I understand Israel. Yes, I know why it's important. And then you talk to them about anti-Semitism, and they say, yes, of course, anti-Semitism is a problem. I put it in my Israel position paper. And I look at them and say that, with all due respect, that's wonderful, but it's not just about Israel. And we need to separate it. We need to understand that it is a different issue, although there are components that are similar. Now, when asked if anti-Semitism is a problem today, you saw that was the first slide that I showed, right? Nearly 9 out of 10. But in the general public, only 2/3 believe that anti-Semitism is a problem today, right? Again, it's not just about defining it. It's also about understanding whether or not it's a problem. Now, and again, if we look at whether or not it has increased, clearly to us, that over the past 5 years, anti-Semitism has increased. But sadly, the numbers are staggeringly different from the general public. I mean, skip one. Go back for a second, right? So we went from 82% to believe that it's increased over the past 5 years to the general public thinking that only 43%, near less than half of what we view, they view it as having being a problem. Now, this was a very interesting question for us to ask as well. An overwhelming majority of Americans agree that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitic. When asked the question, said the statement, Israel has no right to exist, is anti-Semitic. So think about that. That's actually very positive for us. That should make us feel really good that the numbers are fairly close in that. 74% of the general public believe that saying Israel has no right to exist is anti-Semitic. And what's important for us with that statistic is that is part of the basis of the BDS movement, the boycott, divestment, sanction movement, is really to do away with a Jewish state. And sadly, y'all know about this much more than I do from your experiences in the Research Triangle area. So we asked 3 questions, right? The first one was Israel has no right to exist. The second, the U.S. government only supports Israel because of Jewish money. Now, 55% of those surveyed believe that is anti-Semitic in the general public. And American Jews are more loyal to Israel than to America. 50% view that as anti-Semitic. Well, for us as a Jewish community, where the notion of Jewish power and money and loyalty have been questioned for us for millennia, right? Again, we need to do a better job of explaining why these statements are anti-Semitic. What makes this a problem for us as a Jewish community? Now, is the BDS movement anti-Semitic? Right? So we talked about this a little bit before. So first off, I should clarify that if when asked this question, the callers then had to explain what is the BDS movement, right? But American Jews mostly, and the general public, nearly 2/3 believe that it is mostly anti-Semitic. Like, I'll accept that. I think that's pretty good work. Like, I think that there's obviously that leaves room for us, but it shows that there is a recognition in the broader community about the anti-Semitism at play with the BDS movement. Sadly, if you put the other 2 numbers together, right, you're 32%, or nearly 1/3 that don't think it's anti-Semitic. And that's another problem for us. If a Jewish person or organization considered a statement or idea to be anti-Semitic, would that make you more likely to consider it anti-Semitic? This drives me crazy, right? 65% to nearly 2/3 of those surveyed, it wouldn't make a difference. Now, think about this for a second. You're Jewish, right? You see something's anti-Semitic and you call something out as anti-Semitism. And the people are like, meh, I'll make my own mind. In what other community do people get to define the discrimination that they face, right? So for us for myself as somebody who works for a Jewish organization who speaks out publicly often as it relates to anti-Semitism, if people aren't going to value my opinion or they're not going to value your opinion, they're going to say, I'm going to make up my own mind, right? That's not just a problem with understanding anti-Semitism. That's a problem with society. And leads to much greater issues that we face. So we also wanted to ask a number of findings on the Holocaust. Now, I recognize that there are lots of surveys that have been done about the Holocaust, but this one actually made me feel pretty good. 99% of American Jews know some or a lot about the Holocaust, the number drops to 68% among U.S. adults, and 1 in 4 knows not much or nothing at all. Well, there's a lot of question around mandatory Holocaust education. In Tennessee, we have the Paperclips Project. I'm certain that there is a Holocaust memorial somewhere in the state of North Carolina. I know that there are a number in the state of Georgia. But it's important that we continue to talk about the Holocaust. But what was really valuable is that 90% of the general population said that it was important to teach about the Holocaust in school. Now, that should make us feel really good. Sadly, at one of the local private schools here, they've shortened their Holocaust course to be about Holocaust and civil rights. So one of our fears over the coming months is that people might perhaps teach less about the Holocaust, or when they do teach about the Holocaust, they don't even necessarily teach about everything surrounding the Holocaust. They might only look at it from the World War II perspective. So there is a great deal of work to be done still to this day when it comes to talking about the Holocaust. So where do we go from here? Now, this slide is fun for me because everything is number one, right? You have defining anti-Semitism is the number one thing. Education is the number one thing. Building coalitions is the number one thing. And data and reporting are the number one things, right? All of these are important in order to combat successfully anti-Semitism. So what can you do? So these all relate back, right? The first one is about educating yourself, right? What is the definition of anti-Semitism? We are fortunate that there was an organization called the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. They created the working definition of anti-Semitism. It has been around for a number of years and actually has been adopted by a number of countries around the world. And we are very proud of it, in fact, because AJC helped to write the definition itself. And the definition is a definition, and then it gives examples of anti-Semitism. So it's not just, here's a definition. It really helps to get down into it. The second thing is AJC has created a tool called Translate Hate. Translate Hate is a glossary of anti-Semitism. And there were things in there that I didn't even know were anti-Semitic. I mean, it's a really, and sadly, look, I'm sure all of you were watching what happened in DC this week. One of the things that that will definitely be a part of it is somebody was wearing a shirt that said 6WME, right? 6 million, it stands for 6 million wasn't enough, right? So it's not just about the historic tropes that we face, but it's also about how these tropes are evolving and being used today, right? The notion of blood libels is still very, widespread, especially sadly within the QAnon movement. And it might not be specifically targeting Jews, but we know that it always ends up coming back to us. You can speak out and be an ally, right? Making public statements, participating in coalitions, the language that we use. As I shared previously, right? 65% of the population, it makes no difference if a Jewish person or organization says that something's anti-Semitic. But that's even more of a reason for us to call it anti-Semitism whenever we see it, right? We have to make sure that we are doing everything that we can so that people will know. And they might not get it 100% of the time, but they'll definitely get it some of the time. And when it comes to coalition building, I will say, especially because this is a lot of the work that AJC does, look, part of it's about how do we connect with our ethnic and religious partners to educate them specifically. So the general population is one, but then, I was actually at a meeting Friday morning with the local Latino organization, and they are going to host a presentation. They are going to host us to present the findings of our anti-Semitism report because they recognize that anti-Semitism is bad for the Latino community too, in part because there are Latino Jews, but also because there's a large population out there that may not be as familiar about it or may not have seen it in the way that we have. And so we have a responsibility to continue to educate about it. When and look, most importantly, and I think we can all agree about this, restoring civility to the public discourse. Sadly, there's way too many times that civility is lost, and that prevents us from successfully having real conversations about the issues that we are facing today. Advocating, supporting measures that help reporting and prosecution of hate crimes. So in the previous Senate, there was a bill called the No Hate Act, which is still waiting, actually, which passed, which is waiting the president's signature, which will provide funding to local governments and law enforcement to better understand reporting as it relates to hate crimes. In Mississippi in 2019, I believe they had one hate crime. Let that sink in. They had one hate crime in the state of Mississippi. Now, I can guarantee you that there was more than one hate crime in the state of Mississippi. But because of the way that they report, because of the way that law enforcement gathers the information, because of the questions that they ask, the information is inaccurate. And so what we believe is that by increasing those opportunities, the funding, the resources, that our leadership will be able to make better data-driven decisions. And then the last one is provide support and resources, supporting funding for community and security needs. Look, we know too well the threat that Jewish institutions face, right? We've seen it far too many times. Whether even forgetting, if you ignore, sadly, what happened in Pittsburgh and in Poway, and just look at the vandalism, the spray paintings, the cemetery desecrations, right? Like, we need to support financially our local Jewish communities, and we need the government to help support us as well. And in fact, in a lot of countries, the government plays a very large role in helping to protect Jewish institutions. So we have to participate in all of it. And then the last thing, right? Look, I just skimmed, I perused the report for all of you. I wanted you to be able to see it, but you can all visit ajc.org/2020 report to see all of the details, to get into all of the questions, and to understand how the anti-Semitism, how we feel about anti-Semitism, and how the general population feels. So with that, I think I've covered most everything. I want to turn it over to Mike for any questions or comments that people might have.
Thank you, Dov. That was quite illuminating, somewhat reassuring, and somewhat, well, very concerning. I have a few questions. One is regarding the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which addresses when anti-Zionism becomes anti-Semitism. And I wanted to ask whether you think it's a good tool, whether there's to try to have different state governments and municipal governments adopt it, or if there is any downside because it will alert naysayers who may gain publicity by pushing back against it.
So I thank you very much, Mike. So the answer to that is 100%. We support it. We love it. We wish that every state would adopt it. Look, for us, we view the working definition really as a tool for state and local governments to be able to understand what is taking place, right? And sadly, there are too many people have created sort of a gray area about it. But our hope is that states like North Carolina, like Georgia, will adopt, or even municipalities, right? Maybe it's Chapel Hill, maybe it's Raleigh, maybe it's Cary. We want these municipalities to adopt it because it will only help them. Now, much of I don't believe so much in the naysaying about it. I think that it is a valuable tool because it will not, what it will not do is dictate how law enforcement or how government responds. It will just say, it will make it easier for them to identify what is anti-Semitism.
Just a follow-up. People say that it's meant to squelch criticism of Israel, and that's how they fight it. An issue of that.
Look, so one of the reasons that the working definition was created was actually because it was a result of the Second Intifada, and sadly, we saw too much anti-Semitism or anti-Israel rhetoric that is clearly anti-Semitic being sort of swept under the rug and ignored. So the notion that it is there to squelch anti-Israel criticism couldn't be farther from the truth. In fact, we believe that the definition will help to clarify what is anti-Semitism as it relates to anti-Israel. So if you're criticizing Bibi or you're criticizing the government for its policies, that's not anti-Semitism, and that's not a part of the working definition. However, if you're comparing Israel, or Bibi to Nazis, or you're, one of the things I've seen recently, I'm not sure how many of you see. So Israel, as I think you all know, is doing an unbelievable job in vaccinating its population, right? They are doing it far better than everybody else. And I really wish that, our states were doing as good of a job as they were doing in Israel. So now there's a lot of questions, saying that Israel's doing such a great job, but it's ignoring the Palestinians. Well, no, Israel's not ignoring the Palestinians. And by saying that, you could be called anti-Israel, but that's not anti-Semitism to say that Israel is ignoring the Palestinians to distribute the vaccine. But the truth is, and this is what's most important, right? It's what's the truth. The truth is that the Palestinians have their own Ministry of Health, that the Palestinians are responsible for acquiring their own vaccine, and that they have chosen to not work with Israel to distribute the vaccine. So if we just use that as an example, it's not about quelching anything. It's rather about sharing the appropriate information with the community and being able to respond to those that are anti-Semitic, of which there is much anti-Israel rhetoric, and especially the BDS movement. Look, we all saw what happened in Durham, and I think this is very important, right? The BDS movement they don't try to hide it, right? They never say, oh, we want to have two states. We want to see a two-state solution. No, the notion of the BDS movement is not about that. It's about creating one state, and it's about ignoring Israel. So I think it's important to understand that the definition will only benefit us in helping to define what the issues are that we're seeing as it relates to anti-Israel language.
I have a question here about how we can reach out to the Black community even more. Somebody writes, some are highly supportive, others say, but I don't want to engage in, I'm not sure what they mean by this, suppression Olympics.
Oppression Olympics.
Yeah.
Probably. Look, I believe that there's a lot of work to be done with the Black community. Part of my work with AJC, both locally in Atlanta but also nationally, is strengthening Black-Jewish relations. So in September, we helped to create Black-Jewish Unity Week in partnership with the National Urban League. And we view it as, as a way to create better understanding, right? Our two communities, worked together for many, many years, and still, as even they were talking about it in Georgia, right, between our two senators, how important it was to demonstrate the need for us to come together. But I do not believe that we should be saying, look, we're oppressed and you're oppressed, so let's come together, right? It's not, the anti-Semitism that we face is greater than the racism that you face. And I think that's the point that the person asking the question was trying to make. It's about, we are two minority communities who have a shared history and, who have worked together throughout our history, both with Israel and before Israel, to create a better community for ourselves, because we understand that as minorities, we are at risk together. And so I think that is the opportunity that we have, is how do we strengthen those voices? And I will say that one of the initiatives that we have to create was the Congressional Caucus for Black-Jewish Relations. And not enough of the North Carolina delegation is a part of the caucus. So I'm not going to, I know Kathy Manning just won, so I'm going to give her a few days before she joins the caucus, right? She just got sworn in. But you have a number of other members of Congress, both in Greensboro and Charlotte, that we would love to get a part of the caucus, because I think it helps to create local initiatives around it as well. And I will also add to that we are seeing it more and more that people want to be talking about Black-Jewish relations, both from the historical viewpoint, but also for the present and the future, because there is a lack of understanding in both of our communities, especially from a younger generation, about what that civil rights history was and what our relationship has been over the past 100 years. And I will say, because we're in North Carolina, there's an initiative out. Some of you might be familiar with Rosenwald School. If you're familiar with the Rosenwald schools, can you use the reactions button on the bottom bar and just do something? Use the thumbs up or the hand clap or hand clap. I see a few. Okay. So I got a handful. All right, good. So Rosenwald schools, for the overwhelming majority of people who aren't aware, Rosenwald schools were created by Julius Rosenwald and Booker T. Washington. Rosenwald was the CEO of Sears, and he felt a responsibility to help the Black community. And because of his relationship with Booker T. Washington, so he provided a third of the funding for the schools. The local community had to provide a third of the funding, and then the local governments had to provide a third of the funding. And through that initiative, I think there was something like 1,500 Rosenwald schools across this, primarily the South, although they went as far north into Illinois, that helped to educate a number of even sitting members of Congress today. I believe that Jim Clyburn from South Carolina and John Lewis, I'm certain, of blessed memory, went to a Rosenwald school. So, that was something that took place, in the 20, 30, 40s, and 50s. And it's a legacy that still lives on today. So it's not even just about what we've got today. It's also about, how we look at our past.
Okay. I have a question, and I have some delicate questions. One is, would you address, I'll rephrase it a little bit. Do you believe there's anti-Semitism that comes from the Jewish community itself? I mean, is that an oxymoron? Is that a fair?
Okay.
I think I know where this is going, and but that's the question.
So I believe that there are self-hating Jews. I believe that there are Jews who hate Israel. I believe that by the way, I don't believe that. I want to be clear. That's not my perspective. I believe that it's there. But we're recording it, so I got to make sure that I clarify, right?
Yeah, right.
Look, I think that there are Jewish people who support anti-Semites, and I think they support them on the right, and I think they support them on the left, and I think that is a problem. I'm not sure that you can call Jews anti-Semites. I think that is a challenge, and I'll leave that for my colleagues who are. I'll let somebody else answer that one. But I do think that we should be concerned. And I know that, look, the BDS movement is anti-Semitic, and Jewish Voices for Peace supports the BDS movement, right? So I think it's very simple. Or, there are Jews who believe in the notion of white supremacy, which also I don't understand. So Jewish support for these extreme issues should be called out as extreme issues. And I think that's one of the challenges that we continue to face is, the mainstream, the left, the center, and the right, the whole gamut, I think has grown a little bit and has allowed the extreme voices to come closer towards the center. And I think that's actually a problem. That's one of the reasons why we say that we need to restore civility, because we are too willing to accept anybody who has a Twitter profile who says something and calls it out as something. And that's a problem for us as a community. So sadly for us, I believe that Jewish Voices for Peace is, continue to grow in prominence, because who is a Jew that doesn't believe in peace, right? I think they got a good brand, but we are challenged by their support of something that is clearly anti-Semitic. So I think we need to continue to pay attention and to be vigilant and call things out like that when we see it.
So I'm gonna ask a personal question, and we see this in the triangle, but I'm sure it's not only in the triangle. Really good-meaning people who want to see peace and prosperity in the Middle East believe that, and this is not I'm parroting their argument.
Yeah,
I want that disclaimer because this is being recorded. This is not my argument, but that BDS they see as a means of nonviolent protest to make Israel change its policies, and for that reason, they feel that BDS should not be called out, so to speak. They kind of defend its existence, and it creates quite a conundrum for those of us who feel that it's a smokescreen, that it really provides blocking for real anti-Semitic activities. Anyways, how would you answer somebody like that? Or how would you
look? It's in their own words, and I'm going to share my screen because I think that this is a really important point. Okay, so here, this is from the BDS website itself, right? So what is their goal? Boycotts involve withdrawing support from Israel's apartheid regime and complicit Israeli sporting, cultural, and academic institutions, and from all Israeli and international companies engaged in violations of Palestinian human rights. They don't define what that means. So if you're in Tel Aviv, you can be boycotted because you're Israeli. If you're divesting, from, again, it's not about specific areas, it's about Israel itself. And the sanctions part, again, it's about free trade agreements benefit. It doesn't talk about how it benefits the Palestinian people. So for me, Israel is not going to change its policies because of the BDS movement. Actually, the BDS movement continues to be ineffective, if you think about it, right? They have yet to achieve an economic success. But what they have done is created a brand awareness as it relates to Israel. And what ultimately happens because there's zero distinction or zero understanding about advocating for the Palestinian cause, right? It's an anti-movement. It is an anti-Israel movement. It is not a pro-Palestinian movement. There are many ways for them to be able to be supportive of the Palestinians, and that's not at all what they're asking for. And because they're not at all asking about how to be supportive of the Palestinians, that is why it is an abhorrent policy to try to engage with.
Well, here's an easy one that you sort of addressed, I think, but we're very proud in our state. The director of Health and Human Resources is a prominent Jewish physician, a young doctor who always wears a chai. Her name is Mandy Cohen, and she's so she wears a chai. So she's identified, and she's out in public all the time, practically every week, doing some sort of news conference or something. So we're all very proud of her. Do you recommend that Jews in general become more outgoing in showing their Jewish identity?
So I can't tell somebody what to do or what their comfort level is, but one of the stats that we showed in the survey, or I'll pull it back up for you. Let me just find it very quickly. Okay, all right, so I got it here. Share my screen. Okay, so if you look at this, right, 1 in 4 American Jews have avoided publicly wearing, carrying, or displaying things that might help people identify them as Jews over the past 2 years. So that to me says it all, right? We don't want to be part of that 25%, right? We want to be part of the 75%, and we want to help the 75% grow. To me, a success when we do the survey again next year will be that 1 in 5 are worried about it, or 1 in 6, or 1 in 7. But we want to help bring down the number of people who are fearful of wearing something that identifies them as being Jewish, which is why, as I mentioned earlier, I started wearing a kippah out in public because I felt it was important for me to be visibly identifiable as Jewish, and because I'm not part of the Orthodox community, I don't often, and I am not a rabbi, I don't often wear things that make me identifiable. But the kippah to me is the easiest thing for us to be able to do, and I do wish that more people would wear it in public.
Here's a question. The number, and I'm not exactly sure. I'll read it verbatim. The numbers among the general public make it appear that 1 out of 4 of the American public could become anti-Semitic. Is that true? And under what circumstances could that occur? And how firm is that public perception? I'm not sure exactly which question they're referring to, but why don't you address the question?
Yeah, look, so we should be afraid of the ability of anti-Semitism to become more pervasive in the United States. The anti-Semitism is a conspiracy theory, right? That is one of the things that it's all about, the Jews, and as we think about it, right, we have to do everything possible to mitigate people's opinions of conspiracy theories. So it's not just, anti-Semitism as a conspiracy theory. It's, there's lots of other conspiracy theories that we hear about. I think we benefit in America on the one hand from having there being a very positive perception of Jews. Globally, also, that's a thing outside of in Asia, especially, right? Like what we might consider to be anti-Semitic tropes are concerning, but like they're seen positively in Asia, whereas in Europe they're seen negatively. So I think there is a point at which they can converge, and someone's positive viewpoint of Jews can become negative, or the other way around. I think for our survey, it's one of the reasons why I believe that we're so proud to be Jewish, right? We always, whenever something good happens, like someone wins the Nobel Prize, we're like, oh, were they Jewish? I don't know how many of you saw the video this year of the professor, I believe it was at Stanford, who they had to knock on his door at like 2:00 in the morning. And everybody, my Facebook feed was just blowing up with, did you see the mezuzah up there? Like there was a mezuzah on the door.
Oh my gosh. No.
Yeah. So, or when something awful happens, look, think about, sadly, right? Think about Jeffrey Epstein, right? Oh God, right? Jeffrey Epstein is Jewish. Bernie Madoff is Jewish, right? These prominent people, or if you're a sports fan, thankfully you don't have great professionals. Where I'm from in New Jersey, so I'm originally from New Jersey, and the New York Mets are now owned by Steve Cohen. And God help me if the Nets continue to play poorly. Like I wonder how is that going to reflect on the Jews? So I do think that it's, we have to find ways, as we always do, right? We are proud of the people who do things wonderfully as Jewish, and we are scared to no end of those people who will shame our good name.
Okay. Here's one from somebody I know. He's an Israeli. He's a young man doing some study at the law school at Duke. But thank you for this important lecture. As the U.S. transitions to a new administration, are you advocating for any macro level federal policies or laws?
So look, a lot's going to depend on what happens. Lots going to happen in the next, 10 days. What President Trump decides to sign and what he doesn't. In general, we believe that there need to be stronger laws to combat anti-Semitism. We were very proud when the Department of Education adopted the working definition of anti-Semitism. We do believe that those should be dealt with on a local basis, on a state level. And then we're also and one of the great pieces of legislation that actually got signed into law was the Nita Lowey Partnership Fund for Peace Act, which created an economic fund to benefit the Palestinians. It was like the U.S., Israel, and Gulf countries were all going to put money in to support joint ventures between Palestinians and Israelis. So we hope to see more pieces of legislation like that. At this time, because the session just started, I don't have any specific legislations pieces that I would recommend, but I will definitely follow up with y'all as we do.
Here's a question, and sort of I'll rephrase it, but this is somebody who's worried about anti-Semitism from the left, cloaked as social justice, and Islamic-based anti-Semitism, which has co-opted the left as part of that increase.
So one of the questions that we asked in the survey, I'll show it back to y'all again. What was it? Oh, here it is. This page. So one of the things that we found, and we asked this question, right? 61% of you are worried about anti-Semitism from the extreme political left. I will tell you that I am worried about it a lot more than 61%. It is a huge problem that we are seeing. Sadly, I happen to know a lot about the Black Lives Matter movement and the movement for Black lives. I'm very worried about sort of the oppression Olympics, as somebody mentioned it earlier, coming into play in sort of our work with the Black community. I believe that the woke left who are unwilling to engage in conversations and dialogue around Israel because they are pro-Palestinian are going to increase. And I think that we need, this whole, it really stems from the notion of traditional classical liberalism, right? The ability to have conversations about differing viewpoints without respectfully. And we're seeing that less and less. So, however, I do believe that we need, there are three ways to combat anti-Semitism from political sides, right? If you are on the political right and you see anti-Semitism, you should, so hold on one second, I got to make sure I say this correctly. Look, it's very easy if you're on the political left and you see anti-Semitism on the right to call it out on the right. And if you're on the right and you see it on the left, it's very easy to call it out on the left. What's more difficult is to call it out from within your own community. And that is where one of the ways in which we need voices to be followed. Look, when David Perdue, and we didn't actually talk at all yet about the election, but when David Perdue had the campaign ad against John Ossoff that elongated his nose, I called it out as anti-Semitism because it was. And then I got a number of phone calls from people who said, but you shouldn't have done that because he's such a great friend of Israel. And I said, look, I respect that he's a great friend of Israel, and I believe that. But what he did was anti-Semitic, and we need to call it out. And when Hank Johnson or Raphael Warnock said things that were anti-Israel, we called that out, and because I believe that it was anti-Israel. And just because he's a friend of the Jewish community doesn't mean that we can give him a pass. So I believe it's our responsibility to call it anti-Semitism wherever we see it, which is why that one of the other statistics that we saw says 65% don't care, or it makes no difference. Like, that's a fear for us. So we are trying to do everything we can to, I believe that we should be encouraging Jews to be involved everywhere, because it's one of the only ways that we're going to be able to combat anti-Semitism in a lot of these places.
So that dovetails with this question. Shouldn't we spend more effort on educating the Christian community about Judaism and Israel?
Oh, so absolutely. Look, one of the things that we've done a great job of, I would say one of the great successes of American Jewry is bipartisan support for Israel and expanding the tent. What we have done an awful job, and I mean an absolutely terrible job, is creating understanding outside of the Jewish community about anti-Semitism and about Israel. Right. So as good of a job as we've done, we still have so much more work to do. So I believe that anything that we can do to create better understanding about anti-Semitism is huge. And I will say, CUFI, the Christians United for Israel, to their credit, I would say, I wish that they would stick to Israel, because I love organizations that sort of stay in what they do. But I love the fact that they're not talking about anti-Semitism, because they realize what an issue it is. So we need to encourage more people to be talking about anti-Semitism so that we understand all the places where it comes from.
I'm going to say something personal. I grew up near Northwestern. I went to medical school there. My daughter went there. So I've been following sort of the shenanigans that have been going on. The president of the university has been under some attack from the folks that you alluded to, although I didn't know that personal story. So let's end with this last question. How do we support college students who fear openly supporting Israel because they don't want to be shunned?
Look, that is a really, really tough one. Look, I think first thing, right, we have to let the students know that they have to have a connection to Israel, right? We have to help create connections, especially for young people, to Israel. And those that do support Israel, those that do love Israel, we have to encourage them to be more vocal about it. But it's also about, and I think this goes to the question about the woke left, right? Like ensuring that all college campuses, it's why, by the way, we take university presidents to Israel, right? That we've sent, right? I opened with, right? We sent from NC State and Wake Forest, we send university presidents to Israel because we want them to understand the importance that Israel plays for us as a community. So the administration will provide greater support. But I also think it's important for our community to make sure that our Hillels are supported, that our organizations are supported, and that the students, feel supported. And whether that's, when they come home and they, read about it in the papers or they see about it on social media, we have to do everything that we can to be able to help in that area.
I think that we should wrap that up. We're coming on the hour now. Go ahead.
I mean, because I saw a message that went in the chat to everyone, so I just want to respond to it. It was about the Senate election, because I didn't talk at all about that. So I'm going to give 2 sentences about the Senate election. Look, I'm glad that it's over, by the way. I'm very happy. To me, it's not about who's won. It's the fact that I'm not getting text messages and phone calls every day and people showing up at my door to tell me to vote. Look, what we experienced in the election was something unique because of the nature of the way that Georgia election law works. I don't believe that the split between those that voted for Warnock and those that voted for Perdue and didn't vote for Ossoff, I don't view that as anti-Semitism. I think that's all about sort of understanding who the candidates are and what message they were pushing. And I read, there's a wonderful story on local NPR station here that interviewed a bunch of those voters who split their ticket between voting for Warnock and for Perdue. I will say I was very proud of how John Ossoff embraced his Judaism when he ran for Congress in 2017. It wasn't as much of a talking point and wasn't as much of a celebrated fact as it was when he was running for Senate. And I think that it is special that, for the state of Georgia to have elected the first Black senator and the first Jewish senator to represent us in the U.S. Senate, I think it's something really special, regardless of how people voted. We expect to see more anti-Semitism against John now that he's won, and I'm sure that it will continue. But I wouldn't. I did look at the numbers, and I think part of the way people, David Perdue was a 6-year, full-term senator who had a track record and had a different message than Kelly Loeffler, and I think that made a difference.
All right. This was great. Really, I wish we had more time, but thank you, and thank you for all that AJC does. There are a couple things I want to follow up with you that I want to get involved in. I hope others will. It's a great organization, and this is really necessary work. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. I appreciate it. I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. Sharing this report, sharing this information is really important to us. So if there are other, if your synagogue is interested, if your school is interested, we are more than happy. My team and I are more than happy to present this information outside of tonight's program. But I want to thank Voice4Isrel for hosting me tonight. I'm gonna just a quick reminder of their next program.
Okay, let me do a plug.
Oh, there you go. I put it on the screen for you, Mike.
Well, thank you. This is a great movie. It's a story, The Syrian Patient. It's about Syrians who are sick or injured in the civil war that's been going on there for so many years, and how Israelis take them in and provide healthcare for them. It's some really candid filming that was done somewhat secretly with the permission of the patients, some of whom didn't want to have their faces shown. The daughter of the director is going to answer questions during the program, and we hope that you'll join us for it. Thank you for that opportunity.
Of course.